and welcome. This is Red Star Talks with Roger McKenzie. We're coming from Johannesburg, and this is a really special edition of Red Star Talks because I've got, at the risk of embarrassing him, I've got with me one of my real heroes, somebody who really kind of encouraged me, never having met him, but encouraged me with his activity to get involved and become involved in politics. I'm with the legendary anti-apartheid campaigner and communist Ronnie Kasrils. Ronnie, thanks so much for giving your time to come and let me embarrass you like that.
A pleasure. It's a pleasure to be with you and for you to be here in Johannesburg.
It's been, I was thinking about it, and it's actually 25 years since I've been in South Africa, and the last time was in Durban for the World Conference Against Racism.
You were there.
Yeah.
We must have crossed paths.
We probably did.
But I was a minister.
Yeah, so
I was in a different conference hall.
Yeah, I wasn't allowed in there.
You were in the better one, much better. The sparks flew there.
Well, I remember seeing at that conference because I saw Fidel Castro.
Wonderful.
And I remember
brilliant.
One of the days you must have been at this rally where Fidel spoke, and we'd already we got there like an hour and a half late because we'd been on a march or something.
Yeah.
And by the time we got there, Comrade Fidel had been going for like an hour or something. And then he said, having concluded my opening remarks, and then carried on for another 2 hours. It was fantastic. One of the best experiences of my life. We'll talk a little bit about Cuba later on, but I also the very first time I came to South Africa was just before the first democratic elections took place, so literally weeks.
You were there,
yeah.
As an observer or what?
No. It was I was there from the trade union movement, and it was at the time that I came, it was still really unclear that the elections were going to take place.
Absolutely, on a knife edge.
It was absolutely on a knife edge. So I remember watching one evening. I think Mandela got up and gave that kind of famous speech, I think, about, the need for the elections to take place.
Oh, right. Very tense moment.
It was
been
really
huge
tense.
Violence, bomb explosions by the ultra-right, and the Buthelezi groupings, the MPs, which are battle groups, armed by the South African police, many of them having been trained that way, and they were together with the white Afrikaner right, attempting to destabilize the country. Mandela was superb in that period.
Yeah, it's very inspiring, the whole thing. And the election day itself is now known as Freedom Day. And commemorated every year. And we're filming this on one of the most important days for working class people across the globe. We're filming this on May Day. So I think those are two really important things for me. I mean, what do those days mean for you, Ronnie? So Freedom Day and May Day. I mean, how do you see those days?
Well, absolutely memorable. Just in sequence. The Freedom Day was a day that it was an article of faith that we were going to win and overthrow apartheid, but we kept postponing the prophecy every 5 years. Joe Slovo was very well known for saying, when he said, "Comrade Joe, 5 years ago you said," and he said, "Yes, and today I'm still saying 5 years and you'll see the change." And it did happen. So, in a struggle against a highly reactionary, racist, in methods, measures of oppression and so on, virtually fascist, for whites, something of the semblance of a democracy a la Israel. It was really bloody. And there were so many sacrifices, people tortured to death, people executed at the gallows, people mown down in massacres. We're always one step ahead of being captured and killed and so on. I was in exile for a long period, had grown up here and joined the movement at the young age of 20ish or so. and then many years in exile, coming back underground, so on, and finally the nut cracked for various reasons. The main one, the primary one, the struggle of the people, the mass aspect, correctly led, the correct strategy, tactics, huge spirit, will to sacrifice one's life, etc. So the chains were shed. And these were the political chains, of course. You know, the economics, another question. We're still going through that. But it was a dream come true. And everybody were, our spirits were soaring despite the threats, even on election day. And so from that point of view, it was a lifetime's dream achieved. And it's there every day, even with the problems we have and the protests and the Unfreedom Day protests that do take place as well. But every year, a huge spirit. May Day, of course, is something that I grew up with. I had a dim awareness of it because I was something of a rebel as a young white kid. But becoming involved in the movement and then understanding struggle history, working class history, and the internationalism of it, the wearing of red always, and the flying of red flags. And this was taking place even under apartheid conditions, and even after the repression of the Communist Party, banned in 1950, and then the ANC in 1960. That's the one I really looked through as a political person. In exile, wherever one was, and occasions in Britain, occasions in the Soviet Union or Cuba and in Africa, and we always celebrated this day as we do today.
I mean, for me, one of the big issues or questions, I suppose, around international solidarity and certainly around the fight against the racist apartheid regime has always been about that kind of tension, I suppose, but certainly the relationship between race and class. I mean, often that debate is posed that one is more important than another. I mean, how do you see that whole question of race and class?
Well, you have to see it integrated, obviously. The whole question of race really arises in the colonial period, 5 centuries, and with it, slavery, the conquest of the global South, Africa, Asia, North America, South America, and it's capitalism that colonialism serves, and this is how capitalism really arises. There are other factors, but it's so essential to the acquisition of resources, of extinctions of people who are in the way, the exploitation through the slave trade, and then labor and so on. The color issue in the global South, I would say across these 3 continents, and particularly here as we've experienced it in Africa and in South Africa, is the color issue. Even for a white guy with privilege, that's what you see. It's immediate in your face. And if you have a brown color, the aspect and the experience is 1,000 blows a day. The insult, and with it, the oppression and exploitation, the question of one's dignity and so on. You know, all these aspects of what being a colored person would ever shade under white supremacist, colonialist, and with finance capital imperialism, which is part and parcel of that capitalist, that colonialist era, that shameful, centuries old. So the aspects there for people who become involved and feel the lash of the colour issue. If you're a labouring person, you soon very quickly understand, and sometimes it can happen the other way around, the exploitation of your labour and all the cruel and harsh and exploitative conditions. In a country like this, and I talk about it's not so exceptional, it's across those continents, they go so closely together that you can't extricate the one as opposed to the other. And the aspect of that, why it's so important, is that that's the real clue to emancipation, political and economic, cultural, psychological, so on. So it's an element, this fundamental ingredient of divide and rule which goes with it in terms of white colonialist, imperialist supremacy, is to understand that. And, you know, I always think of Brecht's poems and the one about the communism, and the labouring masses understand what communism is, that particular poem. People are bamboozled deliberately by the oligarchical systems to divide and rule. And that creates complexities and lack of focus at times, unless you've got real clarity. And that clarity must understand that combination of class and colour. And one of the famous books that one of the outstanding communist leaders, two of them, a man and woman, married couple, Jack Simons and his trade unionist wife, Ray Alexander, they produced a book about South African history called Class and Colour. And by the time one becomes involved, 20 years old, and I become involved in the movement and in the Communist Party and the armed struggle and part of the ANC. And one of the first things is the question of class and colour and how to understand this, questions about imperialism, etc. And I remember, I think the second or third question I asked the comrade who was giving us clandestine lectures, well, tell me also about Israel. And beautiful response and explanation about settler colonialism. It all comes into focus, like our camera here, capturing our handsome faces.
Yes. Yeah, we don't need a special camera for that.
Yeah.
I mean, that really resonates with me, Ronnie, because even obviously I don't live in the global south, but I'm of the global south, really.
You experience it.
I absolutely do.
Yeah.
And trying to explain to people that actually it's really important. Firstly, I'm really proud of the colour of my skin.
Yeah.
I'm really proud of my heritage, but please don't tell me that it doesn't matter.
Oh, no,
right, which is what actually is happening this morning, where somebody, I wrote a piece recently for the Morning Star, and somebody decided to basically reply to that being shared on social media and basically said, doesn't matter, it's just all about class. It's basically, you know, really, all of this heritage, all of this exploitation is unimportant. And I'm just thinking, it's just quite bizarre that people are still thinking in that way to me.
Yeah. It's one-dimensional. It's absolutely. Because how can you understand the one without the other?
Exactly.
And by the way, it's not just confined to the question of whether you're darker than me or someone who's even whiter than me. Talk to the Irish about colonialism and identity.
England's oldest colony.
talk to Scots and Welsh, as well as, of course, we all know the Irish question. Talk to them as you talk to workers. And it's a very interesting issue with all the depression that one could find when you get a stupid response. It's all class. You know, funnily enough, I can remember as a youngster at a university in Durban, there were 3 priests who decided to stage a sit-in and abstain from food for like a week, and they were 2 white priests and a black priest, quite young, and he had been denied entry to the university, so they staged the protest. And most of the white kids were so racist and so hard-boiled in terms of that brainwashing that they hardly wanted to take notice. They'd pass by, make contemptuous noises, etc. And we were a small little group based at university beginning to study Marxism. And this one guy, really sweet guy, he's still alive today, a little bit older than him, and he's a wonderful comrade. But in relation to the question of the economy, he had that initial understanding. It's all about the economy. It's all about class. So we went to join them. I can't say we sat there for a week and didn't eat, but we would sit with them. Amongst the very few of the white students who did. And I remember this guy, and I pull his leg to this day. We asking them about, you know, there's little publicity, so we questioned them about what was going on. They didn't even carry placards or anything. They just sat. And we listened, and he said, "Tell us about the economic factor." Now, as I say, we laugh about it, but it does go deeper. So if I can refer to the initial period of that October Socialist Revolution out of Russia, comes the Soviet Union, and Lenin, they set up the Comintern. And in the early days, Communist Party here is formed in 1921, along with a lot of other parties. I think the British Party as well, Chinese Party, and so on. And the question there, of course, is the key question. Communist Party is being created where the proletariat is, and it's mainly Europe and North America. But there are people from the colonies who are invited and attend. The aspect of creating or making the socialist revolution is all about the working class, the proletariat, even if it's a small one, which was the case in Russia, massive peasantry and so on. And yet, correctly, from the time of Marx and Engels through to the Bolsheviks, thinkers, revolutionary thinkers, the socialist revolution will come from labor, from the working class. Of course, revolutionary intellectuals part of this, but the social force, the working class, as Marx showed. What then of these colonies, which basically the peasantry, exploited, oppressed, kept down by the colonial order, the most cruel way, and radical groupings emerge of revolutionary nationalists, and in some places attracted to Marxism. South Africa's a case in point, India's another. And there's the big debate there, and the leading element, the leading person, the figure is a revolutionary from India called Roy. His initials can't quite recall at the moment. And he challenges the concept about where revolution will occur, and the social forces, and the question of the working class. And this is where Lenin, who is so incredible in his understanding, begins a very interesting debate with Roy. And they come to the conclusion that in the colonies, the social force of the masses, of the rural people, peasants, and certain aspects of labor, what the formula would be and became was the National Democratic Revolution, the bringing together of these forces, and not necessarily a national democratic bourgeois revolution, but one in which the marginalized rural people and small labor centers would be very much a part of a process. But without the industry, without the proletariat, it would be the breakthrough in relation to anti-imperialism, anti-colonial movement, national democratic in character. South Africa is an interesting example of settler colonialism because we had here on the gold mines, the diamond fields, and the engineering revolution that had been taking place for that reason of the mining revolution, a white working class who struck and rebelled against the mining oligarchs in 1922 and ran up a red flag, but they said they were fighting for a white socialist country. Okay. The Communist Party recently got involved in that. But the Communist Party at that point, which was mainly composed of white trade unionists from Britain and socialists, even Bolshevik, from Jewish immigrants from the Tsarist Empire. So for that first decade, the thought was that without that racism of the main section of the white mining working class, was we will get socialism through the struggle of labor, and then we will create a democracy. They weren't racists, but they didn't quite see how the class and the national, which is another word that you can use for the racial oppression in the global South, that would be the way, the breakthrough, and that in time a black proletariat would arise and develop in this country, which happens, so that within a decade or so, the Communist Party in South Africa is changing from being basically white to a majority of black. And therefore, in this country, the question of how you related class and color, class and national aspect, which you must see, the color factor in the colonies is the national question, and how the two coalesce. But it does also apply to countries such as the empire you come from. So for your parents, grandparents from Jamaica, coming to Britain, and you're a product of that, and you feel the lash of the class and the race issue, and you feel the race issue more in your consciousness every day speaking
more direct
than the other. So how can you simply say to people of North America, the US, of France, of Germany, of Britain, of the Netherlands, that, buddy, it's not anything to do with your color, it's just a class issue?
It's quite bizarre to me. And before we go on to talk a little bit about
bizarre, but you've got to fight it, you've got to expose it, and you've got to educate people constantly. That's the answer.
It's a continual process of education and organizing. Always is what I talk about. I mean, unless we do that, then we surrender that territory, basically.
Why did Lenin say, uchitsa, 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 study, study, study?
Absolutely.
And what are we studying? Not the bourgeois syllabus, the revolutionary syllabus based on Marxism, which deals with class issue and issues of identity, and key issues of identity or gender and or color and race.
I mean, of course, one of the people who's, you know, people look to on these questions, and there's, you know, has always had important things to say about these issues, was Comrade Nelson Mandela. Did you say some of the things maybe that he was kind of saying about this issue?
A really good point, good illustration. So Mandela comes from the rural areas, from a chieftaincy in the Eastern Cape. And he grows up more or less as a prince in a household. But it's not only at that exalted level that they sit around the fire at night and recount stories of the people and the past and the sky and the universe. And he talks about his awakening as a result of the elderly people talking to the young people about the struggles and the battles against the colonial order. So this fires his imagination, not in race terms, and they don't talk about it that way, but of course there are these pale people from across the seas came in these ships and conquered them. But the spirit engendered of resisting, and it's all about the wars of resistance and keeping that spirit going. He then does well at school, kind of Christian school, you know, to give the darkies a Christian culture and ethic. And he comes to the City of Gold, which attracts people from all over. But he's had a very good education, got a good qualification. So he goes to university to study law. He joins the ANC in the 40s when the Youth League are the Young Turks against the rather pedestrian, petty bourgeois teachers and intellectuals who had founded the ANC in 1912. They believe in petitioning and the non-active pressures. So the Youth League are the militants. And with the militancy, the anti-colonialism is also a very strong anti-white issue. But the whites that they actually, they're not racists, but they see white and black in those terms. And amongst the whites is the Communist Party, who it is, although there's been big changes, and there are black leaders like Moses Kotane and J.B. Marx, who are absolutely outstanding Marxist-Leninists, but there are quite a number of whites. And the bamboozlement from the media and the education system is it's these whites with foreign ideas who are going to mislead the blacks. So they kind of fall for this. I mean, this is powerful stuff. And if you're looking at things in terms of just the color aspect, and these guys aren't workers, they're more intellectual teachers still, and some act like him and Tambo or lawyers, etc. There's an antagonism to the Communist Party, which is pretty popular amongst the black workers. Popular, the message from the communists and the Youth League, who see themselves as the natural-born leaders of the black people, resent this. So they actually disrupt Communist Party meetings, not with fisticuffs, but rowdiness and barracking. The communists are very relaxed about it, very sober-minded, and they deal with these young Turks through debate, education, and the Mandela Group starts seeing, not just through the debate, they're seeing the white communists who are standing totally with the black people. They see them sacrificing, they see them being arrested.
Yeah.
When the ANC call for mass action, they are there. And Mandela talks about, my God, he's communists, and he's not totally frank about it, because he talks about the communists as though it's just the whites.
Yeah.
He's not talking about the likes of Kotane, who's General Secretary of the Communist Party, by the way. He's saying, these white guys, they sit down with us, they eat with us, they struggle with us, they get knocked on their heads by the police with us, they get arrested with us. Although the moment they arrested, the whites are put in one prison and the blacks in another. But this is what really inculcates respect for communism through action, and the fact that the color distinction melts in those terms of their experience. So it's a factor. I'll add to this something that I generally see in Africa, because one's constantly interviewed, not by the likes of you simply, but by journalists from abroad. What is it about Africa that they keep looking to, whether it was the Soviet Union or now Russia, this enigma? And they just don't get it. So we come to a question of class and color again today. I'll say to people like this, if you're black, you see through the hypocrisy of the former colonial powers and their neo-colonialism and their invasions and their aggression from Israel to Washington, D.C., to London and Paris and Berlin. They see through it because they experience that aspect of contempt for the color factor, and that all these powers are interested in, apart from the key factor of the resources and the expansion of power and domination, is those, what the African Americans would say, the Uncle Toms, who become this neo-colonial class of colored people everywhere. The ordinary black people see it. The officers, and I'm talking now of those officer class in armies from Mali to Niger and elsewhere, the Nasserites and so on, who see what colonialism is in terms of both the color domination, white supremacy, Jewish Zionist supremacy, as well as the exploitation of labor, of wealth, of resources. It comes across very clearly. So we go back to your initial question, through Mandela and through the observation I see in the world today.
I mean, when we look at the world today, we see one of the most important revolutions, I think, has been under attack since in its entirety from its birth, the Cuban Revolution, and the illegal blockade that's been taking place for that 60 years plus. And now the kind of tightening down on that blockade really ruthlessly by the US empire. Maybe, I mean, Cuba played a massive role in the fight against the racist apartheid regime. I mean, how important is it still for us to give support to Cuba after all these years?
Can you imagine the world without socialist Cuba? You imagine the world with Cuba being driven back to the days of Batista and tyranny, a playground for the US mafia. Cuba is a shining example of the breakthrough post the Second World War. It's just a decade and a half after 1959, the revolution, which, just as the Russian October Revolution 1917 had this dynamic impact on the world, so Cuba has that from that particular point in time. And very quickly, from taking power, basically the last day of 1959, as we know, 1st of January, it comes under the hammer of US interference, because they began immediately asserting not the socialist revolution, a national democratic revolution. It speedily becomes a socialist revolution within 2 years. Time of the Bay of Pigs, 17th April of 1962, right? So the question we come to, and I like to put it this way, in the world of turmoil and aggression today, this is absolute severe aggression, turning the clock back to colonial times, 5 centuries. And by the way, at the Munich Security Council, Trump's representative tells the spineless former colonial powers of Europe, who give him a standing ovation when he says we must go back, because the emancipation, he didn't use those terms, the decolonization of a century ago was a communist trick, a conspiracy. It comes to why they hate Cuba so much. And they made the revolution under the very noses of the CIA and of Washington, D.C., of American imperialism. And that's how they applied this cruel blockade, and turning the screws now with Trump. Cuba, in the whole period, came to the rescue, to the support, to the assistance of countries of the global South. Every continent, from South America to Africa to Asia, every continent. In Africa, we see in Southern Africa the greatest sacrifice in the way from 1975, Cuban internationalist volunteers arrive to basically save the independence of Angola, when the MPLA under Agostinho Neto declares independence, and you've got an assault from 2 directions, a CIA-led one by their puppet Mobutu from what was called Zaire, termed Zaire, the Congo, and the other from South Africa, the real boots on the ground, the invasion gets as far as Luanda, to install UNITA, or Holden Roberto's movement. It's the Cubans who arrive and stop this invasion, and they turn back the South Africans and Holden Roberto's forces, together with the Angolans. They shed their blood there too. But if it's not for the Cubans, that revolution, that breakthrough is finished. We see through the whole period, and I served in Angola for many years, together with Cubans, together with Soviet officers who were specialists and advisors, but bulk was the Cuban forces on the ground, training us from South Africa, MK, the Zimbabweans, the Namibians, the Mozambicans, and so on. We get to that point in 1987 into 88, where there's another huge South African invasion supporting UNITA, trying to break the country in half. And the Cubans come in at a decisive point where the battlefront in the south has been broken, and 3 brigades of the Angolan forces have basically been smashed by this advance of the South Africans. The Cubans come in and save the day at Cuito Cuanavale. And from there, a defensive victory They go on the offensive together with SWAPO forces, together with the MPLA forces, with our MK forces providing assistance as well, and they push the South Africans back over the border, and the Angola is totally freed up to the border with Namibia, which leads to the independence of Namibia in 1990, and opens up the process of change in South Africa. Of course, again, primarily through our people, but the support of what the Cubans had done. And together with military assistance of this kind and shedding blood, there's the health support to this day in South Africa, the training of people in Cuba itself, as well as Cuban doctors everywhere in all of these continents, and building projects, housing projects, and the like. Education is fantastic, and that kind of help. So we owe them such an obligation, but we see it as an absolute duty, and also for ourselves, because if Cuba goes, then it's a huge pillar that comes crashing down. We can't allow it to happen, just in terms of the survival of struggle in the world. This would be a huge defeat, and that's why throughout the world, north and south, we're seeing this incredible support and aid for Cuba. And I want to hand it to the comrades in Britain who have kept up such an impressive campaign of solidarity for Cuba right through the years, and it's aid in all forms. It inspires movements elsewhere in the world and in South Africa itself, and the role of the Morning Star, for example, too.
You know, one of the things that I'm going to talk to Manifesto Press about, to co-sponsor this podcast with Red Star Media, is we need to resurrect the importance of the Comintern, actually. Seems to me, because they were dealing with these questions, weren't they? I mean, we talked about it a little bit yesterday. But I do think that their importance has been maybe, I wouldn't say lost, but maybe isn't as high as it should be. So that's I think a project that we need to be working on. Just want to remind everybody to hit the like button on this, subscribe to this video, share it widely. So we need to make sure that as many people as possible are hearing these important discussions. And the one way of being able to kind of defeat this algorithm that's around is by continually hitting that like button, so that it really does get through some of that. And again, just to thank Manifesto Press, Red Star Media, and the support for this podcast from the Morning Star newspaper, which I'm immensely proud, more than I can say in words, to be the international editor of that great newspaper.